All right, welcome back to another video. In this video, we're gonna read we're gonna read one of the chapters from the book "The Gods of Eden" by William Bramley. We're gonna read chapter 4 because it's very, very relevant to all the stuff that I have been talking about in this YouTube channel for like the last 3 years. Even before I ever even heard of this book, I was talking about a lot of the stuff in some of the very first videos that I actually that I actually posted on this channel. Excuse me. So this is a really great book. It's 41 chapters long. So I mean, it would take a very long time to read through this entire thing cover to cover. But I'm going to read chapter 4 because it is very, very relevant to the stuff that I've been trying to teach people in this YouTube channel. So let's just go right into it. Chapter 4. And chapter 4 is actually titled "The Gods of Eden," uh, the same title as the book. So here we go. The idea that human beings are a slave race owned by an extraterrestrial society is not a new one. It was expressed thousands of years ago in mankind's earliest recorded civilizations. The first of those civilizations was Sumeria, a remarkably advanced society which arose in the Tigris and Euphrates River Valley between 5000 and 4000 BC and flourished as a major civilization by 3500 BC. Like other ancient societies which arose in the Mesopotamian region, Sumeria left records stating that human-like creatures of extraterrestrial origin had ruled early human society as Earth's first monarchs. The alien people were often thought of as quote-unquote gods with a lowercase g. Some Sumerian gods were said to travel into the skies and through the heavens in flying quote-unquote globes and rocket-like vehicles. And we see those, we still see some of these flying globe things. You know, people, there's eyewitnesses to this stuff to this day. You know, that the eyewitnesses for the UFOs and the orbs and the globes and all this stuff. It's never stopped. It's always been here. Ancient carvings depict several gods wearing goggle-like apparel over their eyes. Human priests acted as mere intermediaries between the alien gods and the human population. And we still see that to this day. You know, the popes and the priests and the Catholic Church and all this stuff in the Vatican. Not all Mesopotamian gods were human-like extraterrestrials. Some were obvious fabrications and fictitious, fictitious attributes were often ascribed to the extraterrestrial human-like gods. Once the blatant fictions are stripped away, however, we discover within the Mesopotamian pantheon a distinct class of beings who do indeed fit the ancient astronaut mold. In order for me to better discuss these quote-unquote high-tech quote-unquote gods, it will be necessary for me to invent a new term. The word quote-unquote god alone contains too much undeserved awe. Historical and modern-day testimony indicates that these gods are as human in their behavior as you or I. The term ancient astronaut pigeonholes them into a distant past when in fact they appear to have maintained a continuous presence all the way up until today. And we see that continuous presence through the bloodlines and the divine right to rule and the princes and the kings and the queens and the presidents of the United States. That's their continued presence up to this day. We see it here. The label extraterrestrial is too broad. I cannot name the gods after any star or planet from which they might hail, because I will not speculate as to their place of origin. Furthermore, it is conceivable that the alleged ownership of Earth may have changed hands over the millennia, in the same way that the ownership of a corporation can pass among different owners without the public being aware of it. That leads me to invent a new label based upon the gods' apparent relationship to the human race. For lack of anything better, I will simply refer to them as the custodial society, meaning that specific extraterrestrial society or succession of societies which appears to have had ownership and custody of the earth since prehistory. For brevity, I will often refer to them simply as the custodians. So any time from now on, if they're talking about custodians in the rest of this chapter, they're talking about the extraterrestrials. What sort of creatures are these newly labeled custodians? Historical records and modern testimony describe them as physically human-like, racially diverse, and, most importantly, very similar to human beings behaviorally. And we see references to this in the Bible where it says stuff like, "Oh, man was created in the image of God." Well, that's metaphorical for they spliced their DNA. They were doing genetic experiments and they used some of their DNA to create mankind, and that's what they mean by man was created in God's image. It was these extraterrestrials that were doing genetic experiments with their own DNA and crossbreeding with other life forms that were already existent on the planet. For example, some modern era UFOs have exhibited adolescent prankishness by racing at airplanes as though they were going to collide and then abruptly veering away just as impact seemed imminent. An apparent game of aerial chicken. At least one modern witness has allegedly been quote-unquote zapped by a UFO for no other apparent reason than malice. Ancient writers describe their extraterrestrial gods as being capable of love, hate, amusement, anger, honesty, and depravity. Ancient records and modern testimony alike would indicate that custodial personalities run the entire gamut from saints to sinners. From saints to sinners, from the most degraded despots to the most true-hearted of humanitarians. Sadly, it is the brutal and despotic elements of their society that would appear to be the most influential in the affairs of earth, as we shall document. The ancient Mesopotamian civilizations recorded a great deal of their society on clay tablets. Only a fraction of those tablets have survived, yet they managed to tell a remarkable story about the custodial gods and the relationship to Homo sapiens. According to the history inscribed in the Mesopotamian tablets, there was a time when human beings did not exist at all. Instead, Earth was inhabited by members of the custodial civilization. Custodial life on Earth was not pleasant, however. Custodial life on Earth was not pleasant, however. Custodial efforts to exploit the rich mineral and natural resources of Earth proved backbreaking, as one tablet tells us. When the gods, like men, bore the work and suffered the toil of the gods was great. The work was heavy, the distress was much. The tablet describes the lives of endless drudgery as the gods carried out building, excavation, and mining operations on Earth. The gods were not at all happy with their lot. They were prone to complaining, backstabbing, and rebellion against their leaders. A solution was needed, and it was found: to create a new creature capable of performing the same labors on Earth as the custodians. With this in mind, the custodial gods created Homo sapiens, man. Mesopotamian tablets tell a creation story in which a god is put to death by other gods, and the body and blood are then mixed into clay. Out of this concoction, a human being is made. The new earth creature is very similar in appearance to its custodial creators. So again, all this stuff about taking the blood from one body and mixing it into clay, this is like metaphorical for genetic manipulation, splicing different DNAs together and stuff like that. In this book, The 12th Planet, author Zecharia Sitchin exclusively analyzes the Sumerian creation stories. He concludes that the tale of the god's body being mixed with the clay may have referred to biological engineering. Mr. Sitchin supports his surprising conclusion by pointing to those Sumerian tablets which state that the first humans were bred in the wombs of female custodial gods. According to the tablets, custodians had male and female bodies, and they bred by sexual intercourse. In fact, ancient Mesopotamians stated that they provided ruling custodial gods with human prostitutes. Mr. Sitchin believes that the clay was a special substance that could be inserted into a custodial womb. That substance held the genetically engineered cells of the new slave creature, Homo sapiens. Humans could apparently be bred in that fashion because they were physically very similar to custodians. Interestingly, modern scientists have bred animals in similar fashion, such as a zebra in the womb of a horse. There's this other researcher that I watched a YouTube podcast of, and he was an ex-translator for the Vatican. His name is Mauro Biglino, and you can look up some of his work on YouTube. A lot of it has to have like an English translator because I believe he speaks Italian. English isn't his first language, but this dude basically got fired from the Vatican for being a translator because he was like blowing the whistle on all this stuff. He was exposing this stuff, so they fired him. And in some of his, I was reading some of the stuff translated into English from his work, and he goes into a lot of detail about exactly what William Bramley is talking about in this book. He goes into detail about how, when the gods were first trying to create the human or the Homo sapien, they screwed up a bunch of times. Like they kept messing up the genetic code, and like they would get one, and like the eyes wouldn't work properly, or the hands wouldn't open and close properly. So they kept fucking up over and over again until they finally got it right. Ancient Mesopotamian tablets credit one god in particular with supervising the genetic manufacture of Homo sapiens. That god's name was Ea. Ea was reported to be the son of a custodial king who was said to rule another planet within the far-flung custodial empire. Prince Ea was known by the title Enki, which means Lord or Prince of Earth. Ancient Sumerian texts reveal that Ea's title was not only accurate because Ea was said to have lost his dominion over major portions of the earth to his half-brother Enlil during one of the innumerable rivalries and intrigues that seemed to forever preoccupy custodial rulers. In addition to engineering Homo sapiens, Prince Ea is given credit in Mesopotamian tablets for many other accomplishments. If he was a real person, then Ea could be best described as a scientist and civil engineer of considerable talent. He is said to have drained marshes by the Persian Gulf and to have replaced them with fertile agricultural land. See, so this goes back like everything that we have, agriculture, astronomy, architecture, all this technology that we have, it wasn't discovered by humans through evolution. It was all passed down to us by these beings. He supervised the construction of dams and dikes. Ea loved sailing, and he built ships in which to navigate the seas. When it came time to create Homo sapiens, Ea demonstrated a good grasp of genetic engineering, but not according to the tablets, without trial and error. Most importantly, Ea was described as good-hearted, at least in the regard to his creation, Homo sapiens. Mesopotamian texts portray Ea as an advocate who spoke before custodial councils on behalf of the new Earth race. He opposed many of the cruelties that other custodial rulers, including his half-brother Enlil, inflicted upon human beings. And we see this, remember like when in the previous videos where I'm showing the different examples of like in the Book of Mormon, how he's like always dictating and telling people to go kill other people and starting wars and stuff like that. And the same thing in the Old Testament Bible, where the God Yahweh, who I believe is the same as Enlil, how he's always giving orders to his followers to go and kill and rape and murder other innocent people. So I believe that, again, this just verifies everything that I've been saying. It would appear from Sumerian tablets that Ea did not intend Homo sapiens to be harshly treated, but his wishes in that regard were overruled by other custodial leaders. As we have just seen, our ancient and highly civilized ancestors told a very different story of humanity's emergence on Earth than we tell today. The Mesopotamians were not clearly, or excuse me, the Mesopotamians were clearly not schooled in Darwinian theories of evolution. Nonetheless, there is some surprising anthropological evidence to support the Sumerians' version of prehistory. According to modern-day analysis of the fossil record, Homo sapiens emerged as a distinct animal species somewhere between 300,000 BC and 700,000 BC. As time progressed, a number of subspecies of Homo sapiens emerged, including that subspecies to which all human beings belong today, Homo sapiens sapiens. Homo sapiens sapiens appeared a mere 30,000 years ago, and some only 10,000 to 20,000 years ago. This raises an important question. Were the Sumerians referring to Homo sapiens or Homo sapiens sapiens in their creation stories? There seems to be no firm answer. Excellent arguments have been made that they were referring to original Homo sapiens. I tend to favor the argument that they were probably referring to modern Homo sapiens sapiens for the following reasons. 1. The oldest surviving creation stories were written circa 4000 to 5000 BC. It is more likely that a true record of mankind's creation would survive 5,000 to 25,000 years than it would survive 295,000 years or more. 2. If the Sumerians were describing the creation of Homo sapiens sapiens, later events described in the Mesopotamian tablets fall within a more plausible time frame. 3. The Mesopotamians themselves were members of the subspecies Homo sapiens sapiens. They were primarily concerned with how they themselves had come into existence. In their various works, ancient Sumerians depicted hairy animal-like men who appear to be more primitive subspecies of Homo sapiens. The Sumerians clearly viewed those primitive men as an entirely different race of creature. If the Mesopotamian creation stories are based upon actual events, and if those stories refer to the creation of Homo sapiens sapiens, we would expect Homo sapiens sapiens to appear very suddenly in history. Remarkably, that is precisely what happened. The anthropological record reveals that Homo sapiens sapiens appeared on Earth abruptly, not gradually. F. Clark Howell and T. D. White of the University of California at Berkeley had this to say. These people, Homo sapiens sapiens, and their initial material culture appear with seeming suddenness just over 30,000 years ago, probably earlier in Eastern than in Western Europe. The mystery of this abrupt appearance is deepened by another puzzle. Why did the more primitive Neanderthal man, Homo sapien Neanderthals, suddenly vanish at the same time as the modern Homo sapiens sapiens appeared? Evolution is not that fast. Messer Howell and White pondered this question and concluded, the utter, almost abrupt disappearance of Neanderthal people remains one of the enigmas and critical problems in studies of human evolution. The Encyclopedia Britannica concurs. The factors responsible for the disappearance of the Neanderthal peoples are an important problem to which there is unfortunately still no clear solution. The Sumerian creation stories do offer a clear solution to the riddle, but it is one that many people would have a difficult time accepting. The sudden appearance of Homo sapiens sapiens, accompanied by the abrupt disappearance of Neanderthal man, was caused by intelligent intervention. It might be conjunctured that Neanderthal man was either exterminated or hauled off the earth to make room for the new slave race, and perhaps to prevent breeding between the two subspecies. Whatever the precise truth of this might be, we do know two facts with certainty. Modern anthropology has discovered a sudden replacement of Neanderthal man with modern man, and Mesopotamian records state that intelligent planning by extraterrestrial races lie somewhere behind the dramatic event. In Chapter 2, we discuss the fact that the humans appear to be spiritual beings animating physical bodies. The spirit seems to be the true source of awareness, personality, and intelligence. Without a spiritual entity to animate it, a human body would be little more than a reactive animal or dead. The people of the ancient Mesopotamian thoroughly understood this critical fact when they mentioned a spiritual being in connection with the creation of Homo sapiens. You have slaughtered a god together with his personality, in parentheses, spiritual being. I have removed your heavy work. I have imposed your toil on man. Custodial rulers knew that they needed to keep spiritual beings permanently attached to human bodies in order to animate those bodies and make them intelligent enough to perform their labors. You know, there's a lot of researchers going around right now blowing the whistle about how our human bodies were genetically modified in a way that it cut off our spiritual connection to higher consciousness so that we would be trapped perceiving reality through the five sensory organs so that we wouldn't be able to easily, open up our pineal glands and access higher consciousness and other dimensions and things like that. It's kind of like the way, like before there's an earthquake, how all the other animals, they know it's going to happen before it happens, like the way all the birds fly out of the trees before the earthquake happens. It's because they haven't had their DNA genetically messed with. They haven't had that DNA, that part of the DNA severed. They haven't lost that connection. Well, I believe that the humans, the reason we can't predict or we don't know when an earthquake is going to happen or when these natural catastrophes are going to occur is because our DNA has been messed with. In the clay god, a spiritual entity, a man, physical body of Homo sapiens shall be bound to a unity brought together, so that the end of days, the flesh and the soul, which in a god have ripened, that soul in a blood kinship be bound. The tablets are silent about which quote-unquote personalities were chosen to animate the new slave bodies. Based upon how things are done in human society, we might guess that the custodial society used criminals, deviates, prisoners of war, detested social and racial groups, nonconformists, and other undesirables to obtain the spiritual beings it needed to animate the new slave race on Earth. Humans were certainly treated like convicts sentenced to hard labor. It's very interesting stuff. And we still see this happening today, like the for-profit prison systems in the United States. The United States has one of the biggest for-profit prison networks on the planet. They imprison millions of people for non-violent crimes like growing a plant in their backyard. They throw these people in jail and then they put them to work, and they have third parties that come in and hire them. They pay the for-profit prisons a fee, and then the owners of the for-profit prisons take all the people that they've locked up and they make them go to work for those clients. With picks and spades, they, the human beings, built the shrines. They built the big canal banks for food for the peoples, for the sustenance of the gods. As beasts of burdens, humans were brutally treated by their extraterrestrial masters. The clay tablets tell of vast and catastrophic cruelty perpetuated by the custodians against their human servants. Cold-blooded population control measures were carried out frequently, just like they're carried out frequently today. We see so many depopulation agendas and all this stuff. The plagues right now, the coronavirus is going on. Like all these viruses, the plagues, all this stuff is created. It's created in labs and then intentionally spread into the human race, just like in the Bible. Back in the stories of the Bible, how it's God sent a plague on the people. That's still happening today. The swine flu, the Ebola virus, the coronavirus, these are all manufactured plagues that are part of these population control agendas. It's like the same exact stuff is still going on today. Nothing has changed. 1,200 years had not yet passed when the land extended and the peoples multiplied. The land was bellowing like a bull. The god got disturbed with their uproar Enlil, half-brother and rival of Ea, heard their noise. Okay, this again, this is like protesting. This is the people protesting against the government, which is the gods. The government was all installed by the gods, the divine right to rule, the presidents, the popes, the kings, the queens, all this whole system was installed by the gods. And just like today, how people protest against the government, back then they were doing the same thing. This is what they're talking about when he says that the gods got disturbed with their uproar. This was the people protesting against the tyranny. And addressed the great gods, the noise of mankind had become too intense for me. With their uproar, I am deprived of sleep. Cut off supplies for the people. Let there be a scarcity of plant life to satisfy their hunger. Adad, another custodian, should withhold his rain, and below the flood, the regular flooding of the land which made it fertile, should not come upon from the abyss. Let the wind blow and parch the ground. Let the clouds thicken, but not release a downpour. Let the fields diminish their yields. There must be no rejoicing among them. So again, right here, they're talking about weather manipulation technology, very highly advanced technology. They had to control the weather back then, and we see that today. There's weather manipulation technologies that's been leaked out all over the internet. We know it's there. The HAARP, you can look this stuff up. Look up HAARP on YouTube. It's weather manipulation technology. An Assyrian tablet adds. Well, actually, hang on. Let me read this other little part. There's another little like note down here. These lines suggests that Enlil had lived more than 1,200 years. A similar longevity is attributed to Ea and other custodial rulers. Many people find it difficult to believe that any creature, including an extraterrestrial, could live that long. Okay, in the Bible, there's lots of references also to these extraterrestrial gods living very long, and there's even a reference where it specifically says that the gods decided to do another genetic manipulation to the humans, and it basically says, let their days be numbered by 120 years. That's why today no one really lives past 120 years. Most people are lucky to even live to be 100. That's why everyone dies right around 100 years, because it was an intentional genetic manipulation by these gods. And the story, you can look that up in the Tower of Babel. It's basically a story of when the humans, because we're the humans, we have the potential to be highly advanced. They were building a space station, which is the Tower of Babel. It's like a space port, and Lil got pissed and was like, shit, these humans are really smart. They're just like us. They have our DNA. They're actually too smart. They could accomplish anything. And they went and divided their language. That's the Tower of Babel. They divided the language and then did more genetic manipulations to limit their days to 120 years. You can look this stuff up. The surprising longevity attributed to the custodial rulers may perhaps be explained by Sumerian spiritual beliefs. The Sumerians believed that the personality, a spiritual being, survives the death of the physical body, and that it is possible to identify the personality after it has abandoned one body and taken a new one, in the same way that we can identify a driver who jumps out of one automobile and climbs into another. A personality could therefore hold the same political or social position body after body, as long as the personality could be identified. This is why the Mormons were so obsessed with the bloodlines. They always wanted to keep records of the genealogy and the DNA and the blood, because they were like, they're tracing who is incarnating into the next bodies, and that's how the divine right to rule is continued. When Sumerians gave custodians an extensive longevity, they were not necessarily suggesting that a single custodial body survived for centuries. In many cases, they appear to have been saying that the custodial personality held a political position for a very long time, even though it may have done so through a succession of bodies. And again, I've talked about this before when I was referencing from the Emerald Tablets, how it straight up, clear as day, says that they understood the technology of how to reincarnate into other bodies, in some cases without losing their memory. They were in control of this stuff. It's just they're very highly advanced with their technology. An Assyrian tablet adds, command that there be a plague. Let Namtar diminish their noise. Let disease, sickness, plagues, and pestilence blow upon blow upon them like a tornado. They commanded, and there was a plague. Namtar diminished their noise. Disease, sickness, plagues, and pestilence blew upon them like a tornado. The tablets described ghastly conditions in which food supplies were cut off, in which diseases were laid upon the people that constricted wombs and prevented childbirth, and in which starvation became so rampant that human beings were forced to resort to cannibalism. Lesser diseases, such as one resembling influenza, were also visited upon Homo sapiens, suggesting that the custodial gods understood and engaged in biological warfare. We still see that happening today. Again, the swine flu. When this genocide did not produce a sufficient drop in the human population, the custodians resumed it. Eventually, a decision was made to destroy the human race entirely with a great flood. Many archaeologists today believe that there was a cataclysmic flood in the Near East thousands of years ago. One description of the Great Flood is found in the Babylonian Epic of Gilgamesh, which predates the Bible. According to the epic, a Babylonian named Untapishtim was approached by Prince Ea, who opposed the decision to destroy his creation, Homo sapiens. Ea told Untapishtim that the other gods planned to cause a deluge to wipe out the human race. Ea, who is described in other writings as a master shipbuilder and sailor, gave Untapishtim, sorry, this name is hard to pronounce, Utnapishtim. So Ea gave Untapishtim instructions on how to build a boat which could survive the flood. Untapishtim followed Ea's directions and, with the help of friends, completed the vessel before the flooding began. Untapishtim then loaded the boat with his gold, family, and livestock, along with craftsmen and wild animals, and hoisted off to sea. Babylonian and Assyrian tablets relate that just prior to flooding the land, the custodians scorched it with flame. Then they flooded the region by causing a long rainstorm and by breaking the intricate system of dams and dikes that had been built in Mesopotamia to control the erratic flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates River. The Gilgamesh epic relates to Untapishtim and his crew surviving the ordeal. When it was over, they sought out dry land by releasing a series of 3 birds. If a bird did not return to the boat, Untapishtim would know that it had found dry land nearby on which to alight. Once back on solid ground, Untapishtim was joined by several custodians returning from out of the sky. Instead of destroying the survivors, a degree of leniency prevailed, and the custodians transported the surviving humans to another region to live. The tale of Untapishtim should ring a bell with anyone who is familiar with the biblical story of Noah and the Ark. That is because the tale of Noah, like many other stories in the Old Testament, is taken from older Mesopotamian writings. Biblical authors simply altered the names and changed the many gods of the original writings into one quote-unquote god or lord of the Hebrew religion. The latter change was an unfortunate one because it caused a supreme being to be blamed for the brutal acts that earlier writers had attributed to the very ungodlike custodians. Early Mesopotamian writings gave us another famous Old Testament story, the tale of Adam and Eve. The Adam and Eve narrative is also derived from earlier Mesopotamian sources, which described life under the custodial gods. The god or Lord God of the Bible's Adam and Eve story can therefore be translated to mean the custodial rulers of earth. The story of Adam and Eve is unique in that it is entirely symbolic, and throughout the symbols it provides an intriguing account of early human history. According to the Bible, Adam, who symbolizes first man, was created by God from the dust of the ground. This idea reflects the older Mesopotamian belief that Homo sapiens was created partially from quote-unquote clay. Adam's wife, Eve, was also created artificially. They both lived in an abundant paradise known as the Garden of Eden. Modern versions of the Bible place the Garden of Eden in the Tigris and Euphrates region of Mesopotamia. The Old Testament tells us that Adam, quote, or in parentheses, first man, was designed to be a servant. His function was to till the soil and to care for the lush gardens and crops owned by his God. As long as Adam and Eve accepted their servant status and obeyed their ever-present masters, all of their physical needs would be met and they would be permitted to remain in their quote-unquote paradise indefinitely. Kind of sound familiar how everyone in the United States, they live in this tax farm, and as long as they pay their taxes and go to work every day and obey the laws, they let us have they let us have electricity. They keep the food and the goods imported into the country. There was, however, one unpardoned sin that they must never commit. They must never attempt to seek certain types of knowledge. Those forbidden forms of knowledge are symbolized in the story as two trees: the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the tree of life. The first tree symbolizes an understanding of ethics and justice. The second tree symbolizes knowledge of how to regain and retain one's spiritual identity and immortality. That is why in public schools in the United States, they do not teach anything about the pineal gland or about dimensions or about spirituality. They don't teach meditation. They don't teach about the chakras. They don't teach anything like that at all. That is by design to keep people in the United States dumb and enslaved. Adam and Eve obeyed the commandments of their masters and lived in material bliss until another party entered the scene. The intervening party was symbolized in the story as a snake. The serpent convinced Eve to partake in the quote-unquote fruit from the quote-unquote tree of knowledge of good and evil. Eve followed the serpent's suggestion, as did Adam. God, i.e. the custodial leadership, became immediately alarmed. And the Lord God said, "Look, the man has become as one of us, knowing good from evil, and now, what if he puts forth his hand and takes also of the tree of life and eats and lives forever?" Genesis 3:22. The above passage reveals an important truth echoed by many religions. A true understanding of ethics, integrity, and justice is a prerequisite to regaining one's spiritual freedom and immortality. Without a foundation in ethics, full spiritual recovery becomes nothing more than a pipe dream. The custodians clearly did not want mankind to begin traveling the road to spiritual recovery. The reason is obvious. The custodian society wanted slaves. It is difficult to make thralls of people who maintain their integrity and sense of ethics. It becomes impossible when those same individuals are uncowed by physical threats due to reawakened grasp of their spiritual immortality. Most importantly, if spiritual beings could no longer be trapped in human bodies, but could instead use and abandon bodies at will, there would be no spiritual beings available to animate slave bodies. As we recall, Sumerian tablets revealed a custodial intention to permanently attach spiritual beings to bodies. Early man's attempt to escape the spiritual bondage by quote-unquote eating from the biblical quote-unquote trees therefore had to be stopped, and fast. This is also why in the public education system in the United States, they don't teach anything about astral projection, because when people astral project, when people be able to do that, their consciousness leaves their body and goes into the astral plane. None of that has ever been taught in public school, and this is why. It's still part of the control system. Therefore, the Lord God sent him, Adam, forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from which he had been taken. So he drove out the man and he placed at the east of the garden, or excuse me, so he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden a cherubim, in quote, or in parentheses, angels, and a flaming sword which turned every way to shield the way, in parentheses, prevent access to the tree of life. That's Genesis 3:23 through 24. The quote-unquote flaming sword symbolizes the no-nonsense measures that the custodians undertook to ensure that genuine spiritual knowledge would never become available to the human race. To further prevent access to such knowledge, Homo sapiens was condemned to an additional fate. And to Adam, God said, "Because you have listened to the urgings of your wife and have eaten from the tree of which I commanded you not to, saying, you shall not partake of it. Cursed is the ground for you. In toil will you eat its yield for all the days of your life. Thorns, too, and thistles will it bring forth to you, as you eat the plants from the field. By the sweat of your face will you eat bread, until you return to the ground, for out of it were you taken. For dust you are, and to dust you will return." Genesis 3:17 through 19. This was a highly effective way to deal with Adam's and Eve's quote-unquote original sin. The above passage indicates that custodial rulers intended to make humans live their lives and die without ever rising above the level of our arduous material existence. That would leave humans little time to seek out the understanding they needed to become spiritually free. A common misinterpretation of Adam and Eve's story is that the original sin had something to do with sex or nudity. This confusion comes from that part in the story which Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil and immediately become ashamed of their nakedness. It was not nudity, however, that shamed them. Adam and Eve were mortified by what their nakedness represented. Ancient Mesopotamian records depict human beings stark naked when performing tasks for their custodial masters. Custodians, on the other hand, were depicted as being fully clothed. The implications is that Adam and Eve felt degraded by their nakedness because it was a sign of their enslavement. Not being naked in itself is bad. As we have seen, early humans were reported to be a constant headache to their custodial masters. The slave creatures not only disobeyed their rulers, they often banded together and rebelled, just like it happens today, people protesting, rebelling against the corrupt government. This made humanity undesirable to Earth's custodial rulers. It was better that humans be disunited. One of the ways in which the problem of human unity was solved is described in a biblical story, the Tower of Babel, a tale which also has its roots in early Mesopotamian writings, just like I was saying before. According to the Bible, this is what happens after the Great Flood. And the whole earth spake one language and used the same words. And it came to pass, as they migrated from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, in parentheses, Babylonia, a region of Mesopotamia, and settled there. As they said, "Come on, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach the skies. And let us make a name for ourselves, otherwise we will be scattered all over the face of the earth." Now, when they say a top that reached the skies, I think that's metaphorical for they were building a spaceport. They were starting to develop technology that could take them into outer space. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the men were building, and the Lord said, "Look, the people are united, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do, and now nothing will stop them from doing what they take in their minds to do. Come on, let us go down, and let us go down and there confuse their language, so that they cannot understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad, all from there all over the face of the earth, and they stopped building their city. Therefore, the name of it is called Babel, because the Lord did there confuse their language of the entire earth, and from there did the Lord scatter them abroad over the face of the earth. Genesis 11, 1 through 9. In the 12th planet, Mr. Sitchin offers an intriguing analysis of the Tower of Babel story. According to his research, the word name, in parentheses, in the above passage, let us make a name for ourselves, was a translation of the ancient word Shem. The Bible's translation of Shem may be the error, says Mr. Sitchin, because Shem comes from the word root Shama, which means that which is highward. Ancient Shems are the obelisk monuments that were so prevalent in many ancient societies. Those Shems, or obelisks, were copied after the rocket-shaped vehicles in which the custodial gods were said to fly. Mr. Sitchin therefore believes that the word Shem in Mesopotamian texts should be translated to sky vehicle, meaning rocket ship. When this translation is placed into the above biblical passage, we find that the ancient Babylonians were not trying to make a name for themselves, they were trying to make a sky vehicle or rocket. The implication is that they wanted to match the technology, or they wanted to match the technological might of their hated custodial masters, and thereby put an end to their enslavement. The tower itself may have been intended to be a launching pad for a human Shem. You see, this is why, back to these references about like how Enlil was pissed off that the humans were actually too smart. Like he was like, oh yeah, there's nothing that they can't accomplish. You see, this is why today, we still see today, they have to like dumb us down in the education system. They have to spray chemtrails in the air. They have to inject everyone with vaccines that fuck your body up. They have to poison the food, inject all the food with hormones and all this stuff, and they have to put all these plagues and diseases out there. They have to, the pharmaceutical company, they have to prescribe people all these pills that dumb them down, and they have to put fluoride in the water to calcify your pineal gland. Like, that's why they have to do so much work, because we are like freaking gods. If Mr. Sitchin's proactive analysis is accurate, we would better understand why the custodial entities became so alarmed by the Tower of Babel and felt such a compelling need to thoroughly disunite the human race. Ancient stories and legends from other parts of the world indirectly support the Tower of Babel story. The Japanese people, Alaskan Eskimos, South Americans, and Egyptians all have traditions stating that their earliest forefathers had either been transported by human-like gods to where the modern descendants live today, or that those gods had been the source of the local languages and or writings. It may be difficult to accept Mesopotamian and biblical statements that ancient human society had been split apart thousands of years ago in a divide and conquer effort by flying extraterrestrials, even though the divide and conquer technique is frequently used by military and political leaders on Earth during wartime, just like I've been saying on this YouTube channel for years now. Interestingly, using the technique was advocated a number of years ago by a distinguished Yale professor if Earth should ever colonize other planets. The good professor suggested that Earth could control another inhabited planet by pitting one native group against another. If we compare ancient and modern ideas about how mankind ever came into existence, we find two very different versions. The ancient version is that an extraterrestrial society had come to pass or come to possess Earth and sought to exploit the planet's resources. To make the exploitation easier, a work race was created, Homo sapiens. Humans were treated as livestock and were frequently butchered when they became too numerous or troublesome. To preserve Homo sapiens as a slave race and to prevent future rebellion, spiritual knowledge was repressed. Human beings were scattered geographically into different linguistic groups, and conditions were created to make physical survival on Earth an all consuming chore from birth until death. And we still see that happening right now, how people are indoctrinated to work like slaves at 9 to 5 jobs, a never ending spiral of debt, paying taxes, mortgages, which mortgage means death pledge, and their entire life. It's like they're just a worker slave class right here in the United States. This is happening. It's been happening for my entire life. There is no freedom in the United States. That's a bunch of bullshit. If you believe that you live in a free country in the US, you are freaking brainwashed. This arrangement was meant to be maintained indefinitely for as long as the custodial society possessed Earth. In contrast, the modern views is that human beings had evolved accidentally from quote unquote star stuff into slime, into fishes, into monkeys, and finally into people. Modern day view actually seems more fanciful than the ancient one. In the story of Adam and Eve, we noted the appearance of a snake. The serpent was said to be God's enemy, Satan, who had literally transformed himself into a reptile. The Bible suggests that snakes are feared and disliked today because of Satan's alleged transformation back in the Garden of Eden. However, it should be remembered that the biblical Adam and Eve story is entirely symbolic. The snake, too, was a symbol, not of an actual reptile. To determine what the biblical snake represented, we must go back once again to older pre-biblical sources. When we do so, we discover that the snake symbol had two very important meanings in the ancient world. It was associated with the custodial god Ea, reputed creator and benefactor of humankind, and it also represented an influential organization with which Ea was associated. That is the end of chapter 4.